Hi everyone, and welcome to our fortnightly update on how the events industry is responding to COVID-19. I'm Felicity Cater, Head of Event Lab at Hirespace, and will be hosting today. It's been a big 24 hours for the events industry, and we have a lot this morning to talk about. We've updated our Safe for Events Framework for Action white paper, so be sure to check that out after this live stream. There'll certainly be more additions to that, I'm sure, over the next 24 hours. We have the results obviously in last night from the latest regulations from the Prime Minister, and potentially some more updates coming in this morning even. So be sure to download that latest link if you haven't already for that white paper. So I'm joined this morning by three great panelists who have a lot to say on the matter, I'm sure. We're joined by Simon Hughes, Chair of the BVEP, who's the British Visits and Events Partnership, so I'm sure many of you will be aware of. They represent the major industry associations, and he's been negotiating with the government during this pandemic. Rob Haworth, a leading events industry safety advisor, will be joining us, who's been consulting on Hirespace's events, Safer Events accreditation. And we're also joined this morning by Martin Fullard, editor of Conference News magazine. Martin also campaigns alongside the trade associations to government to achieve greater recognition for the events industry. If you have any questions during the course of this discussion, please submit them in the comments below the live stream or using the hashtag #HSPresents, and we'll be picking those up towards the end of the session. So I'd like to get straight into our first questions this morning. And I'm actually going to go to you, Simon, for this one, if I may. The reason being that sort of 10 days ago, you had strong words for the government warning of catastrophic consequences for our sector, telling them to give us a date for reopening, and, you know, perhaps even to get out of the way and leave it to the experts in the events industry if they're not able to. So perhaps you can give us a run through of the major relevant announcements yesterday and this morning and tell us sort of how you feel about that now.
Put it simply, I'm furious. I was really disappointed yesterday. It felt like the events industry disappeared in the statement that the Prime Minister made to the House of Commons. Now, I know subsequently they published kind of papers that have kind of identified exactly where the direction of kind of travel's going. I'm really pleased, though, that all the hard work that's gone in on the hospitality sector, that means that pubs and restaurants have the opportunity that accommodation providers in a variety of different guises can come back, that we might see something that helps that sector and the tourism sector, local tourism and domestic tourism sector. That's all great stuff because we're all part of that family. But remember, it's business events and it's festivals and cultural activity that delivers so much of the visitor economy in the UK, and we didn't even get mentioned yesterday in the Prime Minister's statement, and I think that was shameful, really shameful. What we do know now this morning is that the guidance that has been released to support this relaxation of lockdown is still being worked on actually for our industry. So I think we have meetings and conferences is kind of pretty much ready to go and available. They're still tinkering with the trade shows and exhibitions guidance, and they're still messing around with the outdoor events guidance. And when I say they, this is officials working in DCMS Cabinet Office number 10. So we're not quite clear why they're making those changes. But what has come out is that along with, you know, nail bars, tattoo parlours, conference and exhibition centres will not be able to open. And in the frequently asked questions section of the guidance, it transpires that meetings of 30 people is the maximum. You can't go beyond that. So that really puts the industry on pause. Because, of course, one of the things we were quite hopeful about when we were listening to what was being said yesterday was that many venues that were being declared able to open at the beginning of July. So I'm thinking of galleries, I'm thinking of tourist destinations, castles, theme parks, actually also host events. So we were thinking, well, you know, there might be an opportunity here. A small step forward might be actually using those resources. Hotels, again, hotels being kind of, you know, given the opportunity to reopen. They'll be holding meetings. They'll have the facility to do that. But the 30-person limit, that makes that difficult and challenging, I think. So very, very, just, you know, we've got to pick ourselves up and start again. And I think we've got to really focus on one key message. If this government truly believes that it can get out of the economic crisis that's facing the whole country by relying on consumer spend and people rushing out to go to the local pub or to have dinner in the local restaurant, if they think that's going to do it, they are sadly mistaken. What we need major events of all different types to start up again, to really drive economic regeneration and deal with this massive global recession that's heading our way. So our job now is going to be to not whinge about this, say, okay, we kind of understand your thinking, although I'm not really clearly sighted on why this is happening. And I've got a few thoughts which we might come on to later. But you've got to listen to what we offer you, because we're able to help get going again, and we're ready to do it, and we want to do it. So we're going to put our arguments forward, I think, very carefully to ensure that they get that message. And it's, I'm embarrassed I'm having to say that, actually, because I thought they had got the message. I think we're going to have to just keep battering away at them. And when I say battering, that is happening. Yesterday, we had a senior leaders meeting run by the Event Industry Board, where we have people from venues, major agencies, major destinations, and they were battering the minister. I've got to say, if I'm being candid, every single contribution was pretty much telling him, you've got to stand up for us. You've got to understand what we're doing. We are going to start losing jobs every single week if we don't get going soon. So the tone of the conversation is going to get a bit more brusque, I suspect.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, it's really good to hear those insights of the kind of conversations you've been having. I think certainly before we jumped on this call, and I'm sure you'll draw upon this later on, but it's there's a lot around sort of perhaps what the industry is perceived as, or the clarity as to sort of what we are and what we do. And on that point, I'd actually like to come to you, Martin. You were on LBC last night telling the wider world about our industry. What impact has Boris's announcement made on your views?
Well, I kind of echo everything Simon said so far, really. I think it's going to come a point where we're going to have to get down and dirty in the mud. When I was only on LBC for a few minutes, as is the way with these things, last night, but I was challenged by Ian Dale. He said, what about, has the lobbying been strong enough? And my response was yes, I think it has been, but maybe we need to lobby harder. Maybe we need bigger voices. Maybe we need bigger brands to get involved with us as well and to join our argument. As far as the conference and meeting sector is concerned, we're dealing with big brands. The biggest brands in the world all run events. They all have they are corporates. They all have event managers. We need them on site championing the cause. We need the big hotel chains to actively and vocally join our campaign. As Simon says, we're a huge economic driver. And I know that Rob was talking about this before we came on air as well. We're the secret industry. We're the stagehands. When they're changing the sets in a theatre, you've got all the guys dressed in all black so you don't see them, but they're the ones who make the magic happen. That's the events industry. So we really need to start maybe tub thumping a bit more. I think we need to be a little bit more perhaps vulgar with our language. Perhaps I think that's what seems to get through. We need the government and perhaps the public at large to understand the true value of what we do, because it's not acceptable to have us running rings around all the time and delay here and delay there. People's jobs are on the line, businesses are on the line, all because we cannot get some sort of straightforward classification, and everyone's falling through the cracks. And it's not okay, because when we do come back, if we've lost this capacity to deliver a world-class service in events, it will set the UK economy back as well. We have to make that point phenomenally clear, and we need to repeat ourselves. My friends, tease me a little bit. They say, because they've seen my appearances on the radio and on the TV and when on social media, and they say, you're always saying 70 billion. Well, exactly. Well, now they know that. We need to make that point clear, and we need to campaign for a standardized industrial classification code, which I know has been on the cards for a few years as well. That way, then the government can accurately track and monitor what it is we do, what we bring to the economy. We need to be taken more seriously. And ideally, we need to have our own minister as well, if such a thing could ever be organised. But I call upon the entire industry to not just sit there and, go to social media and, talk inwardly to each other and other event businesses and to us and to the associations. Go and talk to other industries, talk outside of our events bubble, write to your MP, make the case. Make the case. Do not talk inwardly. Let's talk outwardly, because now it's getting to a point where a lot of businesses are going to be seriously worried.
Actually, Felicity, could I just add to that very last point that Martin's made, which is an excellent point. We've just popped out a note to all of our partners where we said, go large, go local. And by that, I mean, make sure that you're telling your story to your local MP this week and today, in fact, because tomorrow the petition that was raised by the industry to debate the support required for the event industry is going to be in the House of Commons. So we need anybody who works in events to make sure that they contact their local MP so we can really go large in terms of getting our stories told. What's happening to my business, what the impact is on my employees, what my clients need, how damaging this is going to be if I don't get extra furlough support into, say, September, October. All of those are kind of conversations that are required. So go large, go local, make sure you contact your MP, because they could then relay that into the discussion and debate tomorrow in the House of Commons. We've tried writing, we've tried lobbying the main departments, the main players, the Chancellor, the Minister. We've got great engagement with the Minister in the DCMS. But I think we need to really make sure our voice is heard right across the country. So go large, go local. That's my plea for today.
Thank you. And actually, I'd like to move on to sort of the safety topic and bring Rob into the conversation on this in particular, because perhaps if we're, if the industry are doing this, if they're reaching out to their local MPs, if they're fighting for the need to kind of have this start date and be able to launch events, we've obviously got to think about that safety aspect, and perhaps that could be a really good sort of reinforcement of why this is possible. Rob, you've been an event safety consultant for many years and understand the impact probably better than most of us when it comes to those kind of practicalities of the safety element. What's your take on yesterday and what it means?
I think there's, and we were talking about this before the call started, I think there's just confusion at the moment as to how elements are being classified, why 30 people can't meet for a conference, but your local Tesco can have 100 people in it, when we as event organisers can control who's coming to our events, can manage those people within event spaces, and can contact trace very easily because we know who everybody is, in comparison with something like a big retail centre or a supermarket where who knows who's in there and how they're feeling and where they've come from and how they got there and walking against the arrows and everything that people find frustrating in a Tesco. I think that it's confusing, and you're looking at different elements of how do you classify certain businesses? Are they a conference centre? Are they a museum? Are they a hotel? How can they do some things but they can't do others? And this sort of guidance that comes out quite last minute is, I'm sure, deeply frustrating for everybody in the industry, because although we do perform miracles, we do need lead times to be able to pull things together. And if we don't get those lead times soon, we just our sort of time to actually deliver on projects is just going to put us well into next year, and that's something we can't afford to happen.
And I think, to Rob's point, Felicity, the other really interesting angle is the anomalies that we're seeing in the guidance. So, for example, people can go to a cinema. What's the difference between a kind of conference setup and people sitting in a cinema? People can go into a bingo hall. So hold on a minute, you've got all these people looking forward, sharing tables, listening to the bingo caller. What's the difference between that and a conference? I don't know. But I'm pretty certain that the next big event I'm running is going to be in a bingo hall. And I'll use a bingo format for it, possibly, and see if anybody stops me. So, there are so many anomalies. The indoor markets are open. And to Rob's point, you have no idea who those people are when they walk in there. You don't know whether they've had a test. You can't trace them afterwards. You've got absolutely no idea at all. And those anomalies are things I think are really difficult for us. So, people can't do show rounds on venues that rely, say, on the wedding trade. Lots of places like that, historic venues, castles, country hotels, finding that quite difficult. And yet, estate agents have been open for several weeks now, providing that service to their customers. So the anomalies and I'd make it very difficult to, Rob's right. We're very good at coping with this, but we need to really understand what underlies some of their worries and concerns.
And I think we've almost done ourselves a disservice over the last few years, in as much as we, as Martin said, we do make the magic happen. And the perception, I think, amongst many event goers, conference attendees, delegates, festival goers, theatre audiences, whatever it is that these things just happen. They've got no concept of the time and the cost and the skills involved in ultimately delivering on a show, keeping people safe, making sure that everybody's done everything that they need to do. And I think that that's part of our problem, is that just the general perception of what it takes to put these things on is sort of missed. And people probably perceive that life's going back to normal. I can go to a shop, I can buy a pair of trainers, I can go for a drink, but for us as an industry, it's illegal. It's against the law, and probably one of the very few industries of any great size where that is now the case. But for the vast majority of the public, things are pretty much back to normal now, I would say.
And I'd like to draw on the notion of the difference in the UK comparative to other countries. We actually have here a question from Olga that's come through on who's watching on Vimeo. This is a question specifically to Simon. Why are we seeing other countries giving clear and precise guidance for meetings and events whilst there's not much happening in the UK, was her question.
Well, I think earlier I talked about there being kind of global approach being taken, and I think certainly I know that people in the exhibition and the trade show were looking at some of the global stuff that had come out, and were looking at some of the protocols that have been developed. The biggest single difference is that the UK government wanted to provide guidance, not tell people exactly what to do. So what we've seen in some overseas destinations, they've actually come up with quite firmly locked down service level agreements where the industry has worked with government. I think Singapore have done that. I think the Philippines might have done that as well. So they've been slightly more prescriptive about how to run events and what to do. And that's different from the approach we've taken, because quite reasonably, we're taking an approach where we say there are so many different types of events, so many different formats, so many different venues, and so many different kind of moving parts. What we want to do is set out really top line best practice, and the core of all of it is the risk assessment. Rob was talking about how good we are at kind of delivering that kind of thing. So it's the risk assessment for each individual event that is put in the context of the guidance that we're coming out with here in the UK. The other big difference...
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, just the other big difference too, I think, just to finish up, is the difference between national government and also operating in provincial or regional methods. And we have seen, for example, in Germany, they have the kind of state pattern work. So that makes life easier for them in terms of implementing at a local level rather than being part of a huge catch-all national approach.
Sorry, I was going to say, it's also partly the way legislation is written in the UK, and because health and safety, fire safety are effectively deregulated, it's very unlikely that you get told what you have to do. There's guidance and there's recommendations, but it will be along the lines of, have you thought about how to keep your staff safe, or make sure that your venue is clean? It won't go into the detail because it's a liability issue. If they've got specific guidance that says XYZ must happen, and the venue or the organizer has done XYZ and something still goes wrong, the finger gets pointed back at central government or local government. Whereas if it's very generic, then the responsibility, quite rightly, falls on the organizer or the venue, but you're never going to get that degree of recommendation, because just the way the HSE and fire authorities whatever work. That's just the case. It's always been the case with health and safety, but now it's at the forefront of, we'll have to take whatever guidance we get and we'll have to look at that and then individually apply it. And that's where I think that as an industry we need to pull together and take those understandings and individual applications and pull that knowledge and pull that resource, and as we've never done before, work together as an industry rather than competing with each other as different agencies or venues or whatever.
And actually,
sorry,
Felicity. Actually, to Olga's question though, I think one of the tiny edits that we've noticed is in the guidance that's coming out now, is that the word organised has been taken out, because we were very, very clear that we are not in the business of mass gatherings as defined by the World Health Organization. So we'd put the word organized meetings, organized events. And I think that's been edited out by somebody, and it certainly isn't anybody from the industry, because we were really keen to make sure we talk about organized. But actually in Germany, they did exactly the same thing. They removed trade shows from the definition of mass gatherings as defined by the World Health Organization. And that made a big difference immediately, because it enabled them to then proceed. And remember, these folks are our competitors. They're our friends. We do a huge amount of work in the German market. UK's events industry is seen as one of the leading kind of creative elements of that marketplace. But they're our competitors. They're taking those shows from us in some cases right now. They're running shows that we would have had a chance of running just a few months ago. So we've got to be very aware of that. Every week that goes by, somebody else is going to nick a bit of business from us. And that bit of business will go back to an agency, will go back to a venue, will go back to hotels, will go back to the restaurants, etc. We've really got to work quickly to try and stop that happening.
So what we're saying is that it's perhaps perceived by government as slightly muddy waters that are a little and for us to perhaps band together as an industry to provide a little more clarity on exactly kind of what that looks like, for them to be able to sort of fully, I guess, comprehend sort of what it actually is that we do, to be able to provide that maybe slightly more prescriptive guidance. I'd like to actually come on to, I've got a few more questions coming in from the audience this morning. So someone was actually asking about this about the fact that 30 plus events are prohibited. They've said, would they be able to host gatherings sorry, bear with me. Would I be allowed to host gatherings of no more than 30 people, like baby showers, wedding receptions, small parties? Their maximum capacity would normally be 300, but they have a small indoor space. So that's what they're asking anyway. That's someone on the live stream.
Okay, I'd go with that. I think weddings up to 30 is now allowed. I think that's in the statement that we heard yesterday. I think that there is a rule about how many different households can get together. So I think you'd need to check that out. I think it's 2 households up to 6 people each, I think, off the top of my head. But also the other thing that is definitely an opportunity is if it's outdoors rather than indoors, it's more likely to fly. And again, for things like weddings or baby showers or private parties, there probably aren't any major licensing issues that you need to kind of apply for if you've already got licenses in place in the venue that you work in or your venue supplier. But I just think you need to kind of probably look at the guidance when it's fully leased and just double check that. But certainly weddings, that's a definite change, and I think that was 30, so that should be fine.
I'd like to come back to Martin actually, on the points that we spoke about earlier around providing sort of more clarity and understanding as to what we do as a business, which I know you're kind of fighting the corner on this one, Martin, a lot at the moment. For individuals, do you have any recommendations for individuals based on your experiences of this, on going out and kind of describing the way that we work as an industry and why it's important for us to have more clarity here? What have been your experiences?
My experiences are dark and not for public consumption, I'm afraid. I think that there's one way of looking at this that maybe in some ways, not the association lobby, obviously that has to have strict, a set part of government. But I wonder, have we been putting our eggs all in one basket? Have we been so focused on talking to government, trying to get them to understand, that we've kind of neglected the other main player here that really shapes kind of policy and attitude, and that's the national media. Now at mass media, we've tried, I continue to try to kind of make inroads in that, particularly over the last few months. So a couple of months ago, what I've started doing is sending a business events industry update newsletter. So I went out onto Response Source and found as many business journalists and as many business editors as I could find, put them all on a big list. They're all open source. And I'm now sending them every 2 weeks, sending them a newsletter of what I think are very important stories in the events industry, which highlight the scale and the importance. So we've now started to kind of really go after the national media. Perhaps we need to expand that further. So I've been very targeted towards business editors and business journalists all the major broadcasters and newspapers, and nibbles here and there. But again, it's one of those more protracted, drawn out exercises just to kind of get it in their conscious that, you know, big numbers matter. And you do have to get their attention with very big arbitrary numbers. You know, you go into the granular detail, you're never going to get a journalist's attention. Take it from me. You know, they just want a big headline, £100 billion worth of this, and they, oh, hello, that's a big number. Let's have a look at this. That's how basic it works. Maybe we need to expand that out into other kind of areas of the media as well. But we need to make a concerted effort to get the national media and regional media on side as well. So again, my message would be, if you are an events business, contact your local paper. There's no such thing as a true local paper anymore, because they're all owned by bigger publishers and the like. But get in touch with as many local journalists as you possibly can. Eventually, the government, every government, is always going to be led really by public sentiment and in turn the media. That's where a lot of us should be really focusing our effort. So it's a really straightforward call to action. Get in touch with as many local broadcasters as you can, as many local papers as you can. Tell them your story. You know, human interest stories are always going to be a good draw as well. I know obviously very tragic circumstances, but it does matter. That will resonate, and we need to really increase that noise. So that's my message. Get in touch with as many local papers and broadcasters as you can, and the nationals will follow.
Thank you, Martin. I'd like to draw upon another question from the audience, well, less of a question, more of a sort of an inconsistency that's been spotted. So Sam Gill, who's over at Story Events, he's actually put in a thought. He said, you should be, so the FAQs states you should only be gathering in groups of up to 2 households, including your support bubble. It is against the law to gather in groups of more than 30 people, except for the limited circumstances to be set out by law. You should observe the guidelines for meeting people wherever possible and limit your social interactions to your own household or one other, or outdoors in a group of up to 6 people to help control the virus. But a different clause says business conferences, events, exhibitions and trade fairs are not currently allowed to take place in England. How do we interpret this as organisers?
We're going to need some sort of matrix, aren't we, to sort of put together all the different elements of the law. And I think this comes back to what we've been saying all along. There is confusion and misunderstanding about how we all work as an industry. And, you know, one day, just as a small consultancy, we're working with theatre, we're working with film, we're working with leisure, we're working with conference, exhibition, outdoor, you know, but we do it all. And I think that's the case for a lot of people in the industry. They're involved in so many different facets and they can turn their hands to so many different things. I think getting a one size fits all, as is demonstrated by those sort of counterintuitive arguments there, is going to be really difficult.
Yes, I think we're going to have lots of questions like this. So Sam, you know, you've started what will probably be a tsunami of questions going, well, hold on a minute. If you can do this, but you can't do that, you can do that. And that's, I have to say, this process of working with government, and I take Martin's point, I think he's got a really good point there, but we've had to work with government officials and departments to try and make sure that within the regulatory framework, we're going to be able to kind of operate properly. But working within that has been very, very difficult, because originally we thought the government will set out the kind of top principles, and then the industry will supply really good evidence, policies and procedures that people can look at and go, yes, in terms of the risk assessment I've made for my event, I'm going to put the following mitigations in place. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and that's me done. But I think we might have got caught out in expecting, often quite young, very, very intelligent, fast-tracked civil servants working under enormous pressure, at pace, as they like to say, just not getting quite what it is that we do, just not really understanding. I mean, the notion that they can test and trace people, and I think maybe this is the root cause of the issue that we've got, of this kind of confusion and the anomalies. The reality might be we're just not ready to cope with big meetings, big conferences, big shows. We're just not ready to cope with that. Our test and trace, I'll give you a personal example. My brother had to take his young son to test and trace up in the Manchester area. got a number of facilities available, one at the Etihad, one at Manchester Airport. Phoned up in the morning, is it possible to get a slot today? Yes, we've got 10,000 slots available today. 10,000 slots. Nobody's getting tested and traced up there. Why? So there's issues. We haven't got an efficient system in place, either nationally or locally. Despite everything we're being told, I don't think we've got a sufficient capacity in place right now to deal with the kind of outbreaks you might have if you were running a major congress or running a major trade show and it suddenly went pop. And even places like Germany, where they've had a spike linked to a meat processing plant, they've had to lock down a whole area around there. I'm not sure we're geared to do that yet. And when I hear some leaders of local authorities talking, I don't think they're sure they're ready to deal with that yet. And that's impacting on our industry. That's the link back to our industry. You'll never get votes talking about a big, international medical congress, but you will about a pub. So that's another difference.
I'll add to that as well, and it brings the media back in. That the government have been, very much get led by public opinion through the prism of the media. Just look at the Cheltenham Festival. When all this started to really unravel, Cheltenham went ahead with, I don't know how many, 60,000 or so people. And ever since now in the press, they look at this, the Cheltenham area and how that event was the single root cause of utter disaster. They've seen it as a poison chalice, as events. Oh, no, we don't want to kind of look at that because we don't want another Cheltenham. Well, now that's a completely different situation. That's apples and oranges. Now, we're not talking about 60,000 people. Conferences and exhibitions would have far fewer numbers, but what you of course do is you pre-register people. You do restrict your capacity. You can have your flows, seating space. You can actually do it in a safer way, a far safer way than going to the pub. I want the pubs to open, but you don't have to pre-register to go to the pub. It's not going to be easy to trace and track, but it is at a conference. But the government saw what happened at Cheltenham, and they saw the media's response to that, particularly in the tabloid press, and are now fearful, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'd like to bring in venues into this. We had a question from the audience around inquiries. Obviously, inboxes are receiving inquiries, and Andrew here on the live stream wants to know: do we know from what date we're able to look beyond a 30 capacity? Are we basing this on business in 2021, for instance? So, is there any kind of movement on that at all from any of you?
Shall I kick off? I don't think we are clear when we're going to be able to get going. I know lots of venues are taking bookings for 2021, 2022, and I've heard some even talking about 2023. So some of those are things that have moved from now and try to get into what was already quite a busy period in quarter 3 and 4. So then they've gone, actually, we'll do it in 2021 or even 2022. So I think we're going to have to give ourselves some time to kind of find out when we might be getting a start date. And again, we've made it very clear all the way through the discussion and the consultation that we've been involved in that we're not actually like a B&B that can go, great, we're open for business on the 4th of July, done. We need time. Lots of people in the supply chain, whether it's venues or people kind of working within the venues and bring kit in or bringing exhibitions in or whatever. It just doesn't happen overnight. We want a good 6 to 8 week lead time probably. So I know people right now would be saying if we could find out that we're actually able to go 1st of September, that'd be marvelous. We're going to work to try and get clarity around that, but we can't say for now, I don't think.
And we're going to have the challenge though, aren't we, where if we suddenly have a meat factory in whichever town it's in, which causes a local spike, which causes local cancellations, how much buy-in are we going to get from organisers or corporates to put on an event in that area or in any area, with the danger that all of a sudden there's some sort of local lockdown which they won't be insured against. They've then planned something which then they can't deliver on, possibly at quite late notice. So I think we do need this longer lead time that we're talking about. Drive-in movies, we've got one that opens in a couple of weekends' time, but we've got 4 days' notice and no guidance from Boris saying, yes, you can do a drive-in movie, to the point where we could actually organise them. Now, as it happened, we've been planning them for some weeks already, so we were ready to go pretty much. But we don't get guidance until the day of. Can't do anything with that. We need time to implement it, understand it, so that we can actually question it if we need to, and work through the different parameters that we're given.
And looking at the furlough scheme for a moment, if we can, we actually have some thoughts. There's questions around the hospitality sector, part of the sector in particular. Someone has asked from our audience, will it be extended to hospitality? If not, are we looking at a big number of redundancies?
It's too early to say at this point, but there has been a consistent message given, which is we need to consider how the furlough scheme might be made more flexible for people in hospitality and also the events sector. And that specifically relates to the kind of planned switch off or change in furlough that's going to come in August, with more contribution from employers at that point required. But a lot of people across hospitality, tourism and the event sector are saying we need to look at this really carefully, because if you're not going to allow us to get going, that could lead to quite significant redundancies fairly quickly. And it's not, the other really important part, in the world we live in, the ecosystem we're in, so much of the talent that we rely on are freelance, and they operate their businesses in a number of ways. Now, Simon Jacks, the BBC's business editor, reckons there are about 3 million people who are self-employed or run limited companies who are freelance, basically, who've fallen right through the cracks of all of the support schemes made available. He's looking for stories on that right now. So if you're in that situation, do get in touch with him, because that's one of the really big areas where it isn't about furlough, it's about literally running out of money. If you run out of money, you're going to go off and find something else to do, and that loses people from our industry. And I know I've had several examples of people who have already left the industry from the technical side, because they're not earning any money. They've gone off and got other jobs somewhere else where they can earn some money because they have to. I think there's been a lack of flexibility. I think, the government's thrown the most extraordinary resources at this, hasn't it? It's quite amazing what they've done, but it has been done in a rather inflexible way. So when you start talking to them about, actually, we need to think about the furlough thing for this particular industry, they haven't got that sense of flexibility, which is what is needed, I think, in order to make sure that it does sustain businesses. The DCMS themselves did some research into this, the impact of COVID. And there's a massive disparity between event agencies who are relying on furlough and event agencies who've requested help but haven't got any. I mean, there is a lot of trouble down the way going to hit this sector if we're not really careful and we don't get extra support and help, particularly if we're not told when we can get going again.
We're quickly coming up to time, but I have a question myself for Martin, based on something you said earlier, Martin, about speaking to media that you have access to, and about what people can do is individuals to actually kind of do some outreach and kind of fight the corner, do their bit for the sector and get things up and running again. What sort of, for someone that perhaps maybe won't have access to or won't normally have lines to media within our sector, what would you recommend? What specific action should they take? Who should they speak to? How can they kind of find the right contacts to get in touch with?
With regards to, say, your local papers and your local broadcasters, you can find contact details quite easily. You want to generally try and get through to someone's news desk. A lot of local newspapers only have about 3 or 4 journalists kind of on staff anyway. So get following them on Twitter, and you can start tweeting them publicly. Actually involve them in a public discussion about, hey, I want to talk to you about my business. And you'd be surprised. A lot of the keen younger journalists kind of want to get in touch and chase that potential lead. It's a really good way to kind of get a footing. you have to kind of be a bit firm and just say, look, this is serious. There's loads of others like me. Provide some evidence as to the state of your concern, of your plight. Make it clear that you have to save your business. The industry is valuable. All the stuff already. Again, when it comes to contacting someone like your local or your regional BBC news station, if you go on their website, you can find a way to get through. My advice would be, if you can identify the email suffix, which is, for example, at bbc.co.uk, you can put a load of other different email prefixes in, say newsdesk at bbc.co.uk, and you'd be surprised where that might end up. Try different ones. That's an old journalistic technique. It is harder to kind of get the attention of national media, of national broadcasters. But again, if you are compelling enough, you can tweet, say, broadcasters and presenters directly, get them involved in a public conversation. Maybe you and 9 other business owners can agree to maybe tweet the same influential broadcaster at the same time, have a discussion on Twitter and keep them involved. You'll be amazed at what that might actually result in. People do pick up on that sort of stuff. So start with your local papers, start with your local broadcasters, move up from there, but always provide evidence. Don't just make it a hopeless sob story. You are going to have to provide some manner of fact. That's going to be important. Human interest is normally what gets their attention rather than the plight of the business. But if you start bringing into the fact that people's jobs are on the line and this, that, and the other, then you'll get the journalist's attention. So I hope that gives you some sort of starting point.
Actually, Felicity, just to add to that too, all of that is absolutely cracking advice. So thanks, Martin, because that's really useful, I think, practical advice. The other thing we've done at the BVEP is we've worked with our partners and come up with lines to take. So one of the things that we have, or we're aware of, is that there's been inconsistency. So people kind of said, oh yeah, we're worth 200 this and we're worth that. Actually, we've got lines to take. They're available on the BVEP website, and they give you specific numbers that are drawn out of research and based on data. We are an industry that employs 700,000 people across the UK, and we deliver 70 billion a year to the economy. So, those are pretty straightforward, but being consistent in the messaging as well is really important. I mean, I could, for example, if you want to get kind of, tactical about it, you could say, okay, pubs and restaurants contribute 22 billion, pubs, just pubs alone, 22 billion a year to the UK economy, and camping and caravanning contribute 9.3. And if you combine them, that's half of what events across business events and cultural events delivers each year to the economy. So why isn't that more important, folks? Why isn't that more important? So back to Martin's point, are we talking to the right people? Are we giving them the right message? Hope so. And we need to do more of it, obviously.
Thank you all. Well, thank you all for joining us to discuss this. We had one final just closing point from one of our attendees. Gemma Mulder says, it sounds like the events industry needs to lobby the government, sort out the trace and track and trace system. And it's an absolute scandal that's affecting our industry. And I think, we can use that kind of feeling of we need to do something about this to kind of really step and take our own actions towards this that you've all discussed today. So I think there's some really good actionable advice there from all of you. Thank you. So in closing, it looks like a petition has started asking the government to allow organised meetings and events within safety levels in line with pubs and restaurants. We'll share that on the High Space social media after this, so please do sign that. There'll be a petition ready there for everyone to take part in. And High Space's Safer Events Framework was updated yesterday to accommodate these government guidelines, and will be updated again in the coming hours. So if you haven't already downloaded that, please do by Googling High Space Safer Events. We'll be posting that, I believe, on our social accounts as well. So without further ado, we'll take this session to a close. I'm sure you've all got a lot to get on with for the day ahead. You can find a link below for our Safer Events white paper. We look forward to seeing you on our next live stream, which will be in a fortnight's time. And as always, if you have any questions for our panelists next week, email us at covid19@highspace.com or message us on social media handles @highspace. Thank you all for joining us and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.